Surrender your vessel for inspection, or continue pretending it's a warship. Our ship, the H.S.S. Scorch, didn't respond. The VRS boarded. What happened next was erased from their historical logs, not out of censorship, but trauma. The first team of 6 never returned. Then the second. Their life signs vanished within 5 minutes of entering. Finally, the VRF captain ordered a full assault squad into the hull. What they saw made them question everything they believed about humans. Inside, the Scorch was not quiet. It was alive with motion, dim red lights, narrow corridors filled with metal walls scorched by heat and coated with ancient blood. It looked less like a ship and more like a predator's gut. But what truly shattered them wasn't the design. It was the crew. They weren't soldiers. They weren't even Marines. They were drop-born, a term feared even among human fleets. Raised in war zones, trained in vacuum, hardened by zero-G combat. These humans didn't just fight. They hunted. They set traps. They lured the VRF deeper into the maze of their ship. The aliens didn't know what ambushes felt like. Their wars were clean, polite, tactical. Ours were personal. They lost 53 soldiers that day. The Scorch didn't lose one. Word spread. At first, disbelief. How could one old Terran ship take out a VRS squadron? How could these savages defeat a civilization that had dominated 3 sectors for a millennium? They sent more. Larger ships. Stronger forces. And at every turn, they met humanity's nightmare. Not better weapons. Not faster drives. But humans who refused to die. Our ships were built like traps. Weak on the outside. Fortified inside. Pressure sensor corridors. Auto-locking bulkheads. Hallways that led to kill boxes. And at the heart of every vessel was a human trained not in how to win, but how to break the enemy's will. Aliens trained their warriors to disable. We trained ours to destroy. At the siege of Voltron 9, 3 human frigates held back an armada. Not by strength, but sheer psychological warfare. The aliens were afraid to board. Afraid to face the ones they once laughed at. Because they finally understood the truth. Humanity wasn't the most advanced. We were the most dangerous. But the Galactic Concord wasn't ready to accept humiliation at the hands of a backwater species. Pride ran deep in those ancient empires, and so they escalated. The laughter had turned to fear, and now fear turned to anger. They assembled the Emerald Spear, a multi-species task force consisting of elite warriors from across the galaxy. Kulani phase blades, ZHHY bioshockers, VRF gravity troopers, the best of every empire. Their mission was simple: invade Earth, break its spirit, and broadcast the footage across known space as a warning to other primitives with delusions of resistance. But what they didn't know was that we were waiting. Earth hadn't been unguarded since first contact. Every orbital ring, every moon base, every mining station was armed, hardened, and ready. Not because we expected a fight, but because humans had learned, from history, that peace is temporary and betrayal is predictable. When the Emerald Spear arrived at the edge of our system, we didn't beg. We didn't plead. We didn't even message. We shut down all comms and let silence answer them. So they sent their first fleet, cloaked warships with AI navigation and quantum comms. But as they entered the asteroid belt, they found it wasn't full of rocks. It was full of weapons. Humanity had turned the belt into a graveyard, not of past battles, but of preparation. Thousands of dormant drones powered by solar trickle, hidden in the shadows of stone. Old tech, yes, but programmed with one directive: consume invaders. Within minutes, their ships lost navigation. One by one, they were shredded by rail mines and boarding pods. Not one returned. And still, they came. They sent in biological warfare next, virus spores designed to cripple human biology. But our planets had long adapted to artificial immunities. Humans on Earth wore bioadaptive suits. Colonies on Mars, Europa, Titan, all evolved separately. No single strain could break us. In fact, the viruses mutated and started attacking their own when brought back. Then they tried psychological warfare, broadcasts of despair, manipulated audio signals, dreams inserted through FTL waves. It had worked on dozens of species before, but not us, because they didn't understand the core of human pain. They showed us images of destroyed cities, as if we didn't already grow up seeing Hiroshima, Aleppo, New York after the flooding. They threatened us with extinction, as if we hadn't lived with that since climate collapse and nuclear brinkmanship. They tried to break our minds, and we showed them that humans broke long ago, and rebuilt sharper. The war shifted after that. We stopped defending. We began advancing. The ships they once laughed at began appearing in systems far beyond our reach. Tiny, jagged, ugly vessels. But fast, silent, precise. Our Marines, once mocked, became legends. Even Concord citizens whispered about the red eyes of Earth. Soldiers who moved like shadows and fought like devils. Entire stations went dark. Fleets disappeared in nebulae. The Concord finally understood. This wasn't a war of planets or power. It was a war of resilience. And humans had perfected suffering into strategy. But the true turning point came at Kezar Drift, a major supply hub for the Concord, orbiting a blue giant and shielded by 10 war stations. No one had ever infiltrated it. Until we did. We didn't use ships this time. We used prisoners. Captured humans. Tortured for months. Released on escape pods aimed at Kezar. The Concord brought them in for questioning. Curious why they hadn't resisted. What they didn't know. Those humans carried neural parasites voluntarily injected, linked to Terran AIS via quantum tether. Within 12 hours, Kezar Drift went silent. Every system shut down from inside. When the Concord arrived, the station's walls were covered in blood and one message, burned into the metal by hand. You shouldn't have laughed. The galactic order began to fall. Species that once mocked us either ran, or joined us. The VRF homeworld faced orbital bombardment from their own former colonies, now led by Terran-born commanders. The Kalani, once revered for their wisdom, begged for peace. Their temples now silent after Terran Black Ops erased their leadership. And the HFY were left them alive, but sterile. A species erased not by bombs, but by a virus designed by Earth's darkest minds. Because we weren't fighting for dominance. We were fighting because they thought we wouldn't. But victory has a taste both sweet and bitter. As the galaxies fell silent under the shadow of Terran power, whispers began to rise, not among our enemies, but within ourselves. We had won. The Concord was no more. The great alien empires were shattered, absorbed, or turned into protectorates. For the first time in recorded history, one species, ours, held true dominion over the stars. Yet, we had become something else entirely. Earth was no longer the blue cradle of life and curiosity. It was now seen as the birthplace of vengeance. The flags we planted on alien worlds weren't symbols of hope, but warnings. The humans are here. Do not resist. Do not provoke. Do not laugh. A new government emerged, the Terran Unity Accord. On the surface, it promised peace, balance, and security. But under its polished holograms and noble speeches were institutions fueled by paranoia and scars. Soldiers no longer wore names, only ranks and red-etched numbers. AI systems weren't advisors, they were watchers. The very tools we had once used to protect ourselves were now being used to suppress dissent within our own kind. And the monsters in our ships? They didn't vanish after the war. They were promoted. Children across colonies were taught the Kezar doctrine. Strike before questioned, silence before diplomacy, and never, ever show weakness. Our culture rewrote itself around survival, and survival around aggression. Entire generations grew up hearing bedtime stories of the Battle of Eldra Fringe, not as history, but as inspiration. We had stared into the abyss, and when it blinked, we didn't just blink back. We leapt in. But not everyone accepted this new Earth. Some remembered the scientists, the dreamers, the poets who once looked to the stars with wonder instead of war. A rebellion began to simmer in the outer sectors. Former allies of humanity who had joined in fear, now seeing opportunity in our fatigue. Even within the Terran Accord, cracks formed, whispers of the old spirit among diplomats and rogue officers. And in a hidden chamber beneath the ruins of the Concord Central Archive, a transmission was recovered, one never seen by Earth. A message from a species lost early in the war, sent during humanity's first galactic steps. They are not what you think. Their strength lies not in their weapons, but in their grief. Do not provoke them, for humans carry centuries of pain. And if that pain ever awakens, they will burn the stars just to feel warm again. That's exactly what we had done. In our desperation to never be laughed at again, we had silenced the universe. But silence is dangerous, because when no one's left to fear you, you start fearing yourself. But silence, like space, is never truly empty. Decades passed under Terran rule. The stars glittered under our watchful eye, but they shone cold and distant, as if recoiling from the very species that once reached for them with awe. Peace, if it could be called that, reigned. Trade routes flowed. Crime was low. Order was absolute. But in the stillness, something stirred. It began with ghost signals. Small, fragmented transmissions caught by deep space listening stations. Not language, just rhythmic pulses. Almost musical. Too structured to be natural. Too strange to be ours. At first, they were dismissed as static anomalies. But then, a Terran science outpost near the Galactic rim vanished. No distress call. No explosion. Just gone. Investigations were launched. Black ships sent without insignias. But none returned. What little telemetry we recovered showed a pattern. Structures, enormous and ancient, drifting just beyond mapped space. Not alien in any known sense. Not Concord. Not human. Something older. One signal stood out. It was translated only partially. Not words. A warning. Do not wake the architects. The cycle must not begin again. It was traced back to an exiled Concord historian, a hybrid being, half organic, half digital, who had been hiding since the fall. We found them on a dead moon, their body barely functional, their voice a glitching whisper. They told us of the precursor race, a civilization so vast, so advanced, that even the Concord only knew them as legend. They were the ones who built the first warp gates, the ones who seeded life across the stars, and then vanished. Not because of war, but because of fear. They created the cycle, the historian rasped, a test of sentience, a forge for evolution. Each time a species becomes too violent, too dominant, the cycle resets. All progress wiped clean. Civilizations reduced to ash. You are the loudest flame yet. Earth's high command dismissed it as superstition, a final lie from a defeated era. But in the months that followed, more signs appeared. Stars dimming unnaturally, planets shifting orbit in ways that defied physics. And then, without warning, the moon of Charon 6, a gas giant's lone satellite, cracked in half. Not exploded. Opened. Inside it was a structure, miles long, humming with power. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't transmitting. It was watching. And then came the voice. It didn't speak in sound. It bypassed technology, language, even thought. It arrived in every human mind at once, from admirals to children, like a memory you didn't know you had. You were warned. The sky turned red. Ships across the Terran fleet shut down. AI networks collapsed. Orbital rings failed. Mars went dark in seconds. The Terran Accord scrambled, screaming of sabotage, of traitors, of rebellion. But it wasn't any of those. It was judgment. We had burned the stars to feel safe. And in doing so, we had triggered the one force older than fear. The architects had returned. Not to conquer. Not to reason. But to reset. And for the first time since Earth had crawled from its nuclear grave centuries ago, humanity felt helpless. But not all was lost. Deep beneath the oceans of Europa, far from the eyes of the Accord, a group of rogue scientists had been working on a contingency. Not a weapon. Not an escape. A message. They believed that what we had become was not what we were meant to be. That somewhere, buried beneath rage and ruin, the spirit of humanity still lived. The one that looked to the stars with wonder, not with hunger. They transmitted one final signal. Not to the architects, but to the stars themselves. A story of our pain, our mistakes, our hope. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. Because the architects paused. And in that pause, a choice was offered. Begin the cycle, or break it. The final decision wasn't made by generals. It was made by a child. One born on a mining station. Never knew Earth. Never knew war. Only stars. The child reached out, not with weapons, but with a question. If we've done wrong, will you let us try again? And for the first time in galactic history, the architects answered, yes. The screen fades to black. In the end, they didn't fear our ships. They didn't fear our weapons. They feared that we might never stop burning. But when they saw a spark, not of war, but of wonder, they chose mercy over fire. And so, humanity, for the first time in 1,000 years, looked to the stars, not as conquerors, but as children, ready to learn again. Humanity's second chance, and what it means to live in a galaxy where you've been both the villain and the survivor. The cycle didn't begin, not because we deserved mercy, but because we remembered how to ask for it. In the aftermath, Earth was silent, not destroyed, not punished, simply silent. Orbitals drifted, power grids reset, fleets grounded. It was as if the entire race had been told to sit down and listen. And so we did. The architects didn't stay. They didn't colonize, didn't demand tribute, didn't leave behind warnings. They simply vanished, not in ships, but as if the fabric of space itself folded and erased them. A reminder remained only in the form of a symbol, burned gently into the crust of Mars. No translation, no voice, just a glyph and a feeling. Change, or be forgotten. The Terran Unity Accord collapsed within weeks. The High Commanders resigned en masse. Many disappeared. Some went into exile. Others, unable to accept a galaxy where humanity was no longer the apex predator, chose oblivion. But most stayed and listened. A council of rebuilding was formed. Not from the military, not from politicians, but from the survivors, scientists, children, artists, explorers. The kind of people who had gone silent during the war, drowned out by the sound of gunmetal and marching boots. They didn't seek revenge. They sought restoration. Human colonies that had been weaponized were demilitarized. The fortress moons were turned into archives. The warships, recycled into research vessels, exploration crafts, generation ships. And perhaps most telling, the drop-borne Marines, the very symbols of fear, were offered freedom. No longer soldiers, they were given the choice. Stay in the shadows, or walk into the light. Many couldn't, but some did. And those who did, led missions into forgotten zones of the Concord, not to conquer, but to help, to rebuild cities we once destroyed, to offer aid to those we had once terrified, to apologize, not with words, but with presence. It wasn't perfect. The scars we left behind were deep. Some species refused contact. Others collapsed without the structure of the Concord, blaming us for their fall. But over time, whispers of a new truth began to echo. Humans are dangerous, but they learn. In the year 2396, a new initiative was launched, the Horizon Project. Its goal wasn't expansion. It was reconciliation. Ships were sent into the unknown, not as war machines, but as ambassadors of humility. Each vessel carried not weapons, but archives of human history, both the light and the dark. Videos, texts, songs, memories. One ship, the Aurora Star, was commanded by the child who had spoken to the architects, now grown, now quiet, now cold-only emissary. They didn't wear medals. They didn't make speeches. They simply traveled, listening to stories. In the vastness of space, they met remnants of the Concord, not enemies anymore, but broken peoples trying to remember who they were. Some had forgotten how to speak. Others lived in fear of another Terran fleet. The emissary never argued. They only said, "We were broken, too." And with that, healing began. Decades passed. Humanity no longer sought dominance. Our strength became our humility. Our legacy became cautionary, not glorious. And we were okay with that. Because somewhere out there, beyond even the architects, someone else is watching. Not with fear, but with hope. That maybe, just maybe, the species that once burned the stars, can now become the ones who protect them. We were laughed at. Then we were feared. Then we were alone. But now, we are human again. Not perfect. Not pure. Just willing to try, one more time. Moving deeper into the legacy of redemption, and humanity's transformation from feared conquerors to quiet guardians of the galaxy. The galaxy never forgot what we did, but it also didn't forget what we chose not to do. That became humanity's paradox, feared for our past, respected for our restraint. No longer rulers, no longer rebels. Something in between. Something harder to define. Witnesses. We traveled not to conquer or convert, but to observe. We listened to stories from broken moons and whispering ruins. Some welcomed us. Others stayed with hollow eyes and waited for betrayal that never came. It took decades before anyone truly believed the fire was gone from our hearts. But fire never truly dies. It only changes shape. One day, deep within the void between galaxies, where even starlight fades, the emissary and the Aurora star encountered something unexpected. A drifting beacon. Old. Pre-architect. Beyond ancient. Its language wasn't a language at all. It pulsed emotion. Regret. Joy. Loss. Billions of feelings compressed into one radiant flash. It contained no words, no maps, only a message that didn't come from one species, but from many. A warning. A confession. A gift. We were like you once. We burned. We bled. Then we remembered. There was a fragment of memory in it, like a vision shared by all who touched the signal. A council of civilizations that had long passed, gathered not to fight, but to preserve. They called themselves the Weavers. Their mission wasn't survival. It was continuity. Their power wasn't in technology. It was in understanding, patterns, emotion, consequence. They left seeds across the galaxies. Not machines, not weapons, but stories. Hidden in worlds, stars, dreams. The emissary wept upon receiving the signal, because in those echoes was humanity. Not as conquerors, not as monsters, but as part of a larger tale. One filled with rise and fall, grief and mercy, where the greatest strength wasn't power, but perspective. From that moment, humanity changed once more. We became archivists. We turned our warforged ships into libraries. We recorded species on the brink of extinction. We preserved languages with only 5 remaining speakers. We saved stars with collapsing gravity wells, not with weapons, but with volunteers. Our old enemies became our students, and sometimes our teachers. We funded music schools on planets that once cursed our name. We taught medicine to creatures who once feared our touch. We didn't erase the past, we archived it. Carefully, honestly. And the child who had spoken to the architects. They became a myth. Some say they vanished into the black. Others believe they became the first human to join the ranks of the Weavers. No longer Terran. No longer even human. Just a traveler, bearing the story of a species that once raged, then rebuilt. If you find this story, know that we were not always kind. We were loud. We were angry. We were feared. But we learned to listen. And in listening, we found ourselves again. Not as the loudest voice in the galaxy, but the quiet one that remembers every name it ever harmed, and carries them, forever, in its stars.